As the Money Burns is an original podcast by Nikki Woodard, based on historical research. This is a deep exploration into the lives of actual heirs and heiresses to some of America's most famous fortunes and what happens when the Great Depression hits. Each episode is comprised into 3 primary sections. Section 1 is a narrative story. Section 2 goes into the historical facts behind the scenario. Section 3 focuses on contemporary emotional and personal connections. Story recap. Before the Wall Street crash of 1929, teen heiresses Barbara Hutton and Doris Duke strive to join high society, thus must find a way to attend the debutante ball of it girl Louise Van Alen, who's having a secret love affair with visiting prince Alexis Divani. Among the adults, Doris's socially ambitious mother Nana Lean struggles to build her own personal fortune and vies to climb the social ladder under the guidance of opera singer Cobbina Wright, whose husband rivals Barbara's father in the stock market business. Now back to As the Money Burns. The setting sun. They say the sun never sets on a Vanderbilt, but no good fortune lasts forever. Threats to a fortune's longevity might be nothing more than an overabundance of another sort. Section 1. Story. Inside one of the most lavish Newport mansions, Dowager Alice Vanderbilt, in her early 80s, moves from dark room to dark room. Even the shadows can't hide the opulence. In the style of an Italian Renaissance villa, the cottage merges the best European artistic style with American technology. The gold, the marble, the grand staircase, the large reception hall, ornately painted ceilings, the chandeliers, furniture, artwork, grandeur on an epic scale. Heated fresh and saltwater baths, with an internal power grid and boiler room on the property but safely away from the main house. The 70-room mansion, over 62,000 square feet of living space, covers one of 14 acres, cliffside, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean as the waves break against its rocky shores, which gives the estate its name, the Breakers. Appearing like a relic of the Gilded Age, Alice wears her extravagant jewels, long strings of pearls mixed with large precious stones. Wistfully, she passes a portrait of her younger self wearing the same necklace, now a long-distant past. Cradling a bulky white handkerchief, Alice informs her butler which rooms will be used this summer and which ones should remain closed. He inquires about which events she intends to hold this season and proceeds to estimate the necessary staff requirements. They stare at each other for a moment. He pulls from his pocket a large ruby ring and apologizes. "The original did not yield as much as hoped, but its replacement still has excellent craftsmanship." Alice examines the replica and slips it onto her finger. She sighs and clutches her handkerchief as she watches the drapes flutter in the morning breeze. Before he leaves to carry out her orders, she unwraps the white handkerchief, revealing a ruby brooch inside. Sadly, he takes the piece and nods. In the salon, the dowager sits on a chaise and sorts the invitations brought to her attention into piles of yes, no, and maybe. Barely reading an envelope addressed to the Mrs. Vanderbilt, she realizes it is mistakenly sent to the wrong Mrs. Vanderbilt. The dowager returns the contents to its envelope. Another envelope is addressed from Mrs. Vanderbilt to the Mrs. Vanderbilt. With a soured face, Alice adjusts her spectacles and reviews the invite, then compares it to a list of activities in her own guest list. That afternoon, outside another Newport cottage, Wakehurst, talented opera singer and society hostess Cobbina Wright preps her young protégés, budding fashionista Barbara Hutton and tall, awkward Doris Duke on the importance of this day's activity. Cobbina cautions, "Daisy Van Alen has gathered a small informal group for tea to help plan Louise's debut. I was able to convince her it would be nice to include both of you, as you seem to be mingling quite a bit with the younger Van Alen clan." Cobbina reviews Barbara and Doris, who are naturally both excited and anxious. Cobbina turns her attention to include their accompanying guardians, the socially ambitious Nanaline Duke, and forever and over her head, Irene Hutton. Acceptance by Daisy carries strong merit. It requires 2 invitations, one for tea, the second for dinner, to get the real seal of approval as an insider. Please mind all manners and be very careful The Mrs. Vanderbilt will be in attendance along with Mrs. Vanderbilt. Always a precarious matter. Much to Daisy's credit and the importance of Louise's coming out that we are even facing this conundrum. All follow behind Cabina as her blonde, curly-haired namesake 5-year-old daughter skips ahead to greet her little dark-haired friend, Gloria Vanderbilt, also 5. The 2 little ones head off to the nursery for play. As the butler leads them through Wakehurst, Barbara glances around hoping to catch a glimpse of the dashing Prince Alexis, still recovering from his polo injuries. She's sorely disappointed when they are escorted into a room full of ladies only. The glittering social butterfly Grace Wilson Vanderbilt, nearing 50, flutters about while carefully avoiding her mother-in-law, Alice. The 2 Mrs. Vanderbilts have a long, rather strained relationship. Among this capital S society set are 3 queen bees, Alice from a bygone era, Grace still waiting for her mother-in-law to relinquish officially, which is so not going to happen, and in the very near future, and last of an era, Daisy. Cabina is a supreme hostess, but she is not a queen bee, but more a high-level lady-in-waiting. Nanaline needs to elevate into this social set. When Grace suggests a small game of cards at one table, Irene, who can never resist a game, excitedly joins in. Nanaline is grateful to finally be separated from her inferior and joins Daisy and Cabina deep into planning details. Uncomfortably, Louise, Barbara, and Dora share a cup of tea with Alice. Barbara inquires over the prince's health, and Louise demurs his recovery is progressing and that the guys are spending the afternoon at Beechwood. Alice watches the young teens interact and tries to ascertain which one will likely become the next queen bee, when she catches sight of Barbara's own ruby ring. Barbara immediately realizes the attention and goes to cover it, fearful that her stepmother Irene might flash her own duplicate ring. Alice follows the eye path and sees that other one too. Alice smiles. "What a lovely ring! Those sapphires would better complement your eyes." Immensely fascinated by jewelry, Barbara shifts forward and points to Alice's replica. "That's truly a remarkable piece. May I get a closer look? I really adore how the facets of an Asher cut reflects like a waterfall." A tiny flash of fear crosses Alice's eyes that she might be exposed. What could this young teen possibly know about jewelry? Alice diverts attention. "You know, I've always said a lady must have a good set of pearls." She allows Barbara to come closer to inspect her trademark string. Alice then turns her attention to the painfully shy Doris. "My dear, what are your interests?" With all attention on her, Doris agonizes, then blurts out, I would like to study botany at the university." The whole room falls silent. Every face is blank with confusion, except Nanaline, who is mortified. Section 2, History and Historiography. There's more than one way to lose a fortune. Money is not always renewable, though it does like to recycle itself amongst the elites. But what makes money disappear? That's as important, if not more, than how to make it, as every aristocratic and royal family throughout history would know. But what happens when there are too many heirs? It's so easy to watch and envy the flexing of wealth, but oh, how people try to hide when it's being lost is even more interesting. This whole podcast journey began when I uncovered a gossip column detailing a summer of events in 1929 Newport. The article stressed the importance of Alice Vanderbilt's return to the Breakers after several years away. Remember I warned you about too many similar names, especially within the same family? Hold on, it's about to get really bumpy and confusing. Today we might consider the Vanderbilts as established old money. Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt was a railroad and shipping tycoon, literally paving the way with infrastructure for future American industrial millionaires Rockefeller, Carnegie, Firestone, Ford, J.P. Morgan, and the other big names. Duke and Woolworth fortunes would be the next generation. But these were all new money during America's Gilded Age, 1870s to 1900. In America, old money consisted of families dating back to the Mayflower until another relative newcomer broke in. America's first self-made millionaire and fur trader, John Jacob Astor. By the 1880s, his family ran society, especially under Caroline Astor, the grandmother of our two primary heirs, Louise Van Alen and J.G. Astor. While the men focused on building wealth and dominating industry, the women battled for control over social rank both outside the family as well as in. There was always two rankings to consider, the one in the social strata of the elite, and the other was within the family. During her prime era, Alice Vanderbilt found herself squarely in the middle of all that social intrigue. She outlived and outlasted her rivals, only to experience the dawn of a new era with more new rivals rising. Caroline Astor was the reigning queen of Gilded Age society. With her ultra-exclusive 400 list, she made sure strict adherence to rank as she so designated mattered. It was also Caroline who made the Mrs. So-and-so as the signifying mark of importance even within a family. She was, however, toppled by a Vanderbilt, Alva Vanderbilt to be exact, sister-in-law to Alice. Caroline and Alice were descendants of colonial families, and Alva from a fairly well-off merchant family that summered in Newport. All three married into far greater fortunes. Alice met her husband Cornelius II while both were teaching Sunday school. She was considered modest and fairly lackluster, but she would prove durable. They married in 1867 and had 7 children together. Alice would bide her time climbing the social ranks, but her new sister-in-law, Alva, married to William in 1875, was not so meek. It was Alva's bold and bulldogged determination that really put the Vanderbilts into reigning over society. She challenged and outsmarted Caroline Astor through their daughters. Alva's daughter Consuelo was having a much-anticipated party, only to exclude a distraught Carrie, thereby forcing her mother Caroline Astor to accept Vanderbilts into her 400. Alva would continually challenge Caroline, and Alice would often enter into the game of one-upmanship. If Alva gave away silver party favors, Alice would give gold. Their Newport cottages, Marble House and Breakers were magnificent pieces, though the Breakers so outshone the Marble House that England's Duke of Marlborough attempted to break his engagement with Alva's daughter Consuelo for Alice's daughter Gertrude. The temperamental and artistic Gertrude refused, and Alva forced Consuelo into a very unhappy and one of the biggest and most disastrous American dollar princess marriages with European royalty. They would later divorce. Alva challenged everyone, including the more rigid and etiquette-driven Alice. Ignoring protocol of internal rank, Alva co-opted the moniker the Mrs. Vanderbilt, much to Alice's disapproval. However, when Alva did the unimaginable and divorced her Vanderbilt husband in 1895, she created a whole new trend and her biggest legacy: divorce and remarriage amongst the elite. Previously a social death sentence, but Alva was so powerful she kept her queen bee status, married the Jewish Oliver Belmont, got a new Newport home, and went on to promote women's suffrage. Upon the divorce, Alice took over the coveted the Mrs. Vanderbilt title, meaning the one and only, despite being amongst many. No sooner was she done with Alva than a new rival popped up, Grace Wilson, who married Alice's second son, Cornelius III, also known as Neely, in 1896. Immediately, Alice and Cornelius II were against the match. Grace had been engaged to their firstborn, now deceased son. Disreputably, Grace's father made his money through Civil War profiteering, and all her siblings married so well they were known as the Marrying Wilsons or Matchmaking Wilsons. Her brother married Carrie Astor, and one sister married a Goulet, and the other sister the British ambassador and brother to the Earl of Pembroke. It has been noted Grace was fully intent on marrying a Vanderbilt no matter what. Grace and Neely's engagement was greatly contested by his parents. Alice considered it to be the cause of Cornelius II's stroke and early death. After marrying in haste, Neely was disinherited, but the couple's story was splashed across the headlines for its romanticism. The majority of the fortune went to the third son, Alfred. Alice and her husband, Cornelius II, had 7 children. Alice would survive her husband by 35 years and outlive 4 of their children. Daughter Alice died in childhood in 1894. William died from typhoid while studying at Yale in 1892. Alfred died on the RMS Lusitania, the British ocean liner sunk by a German U-boat during World War I in 1915, and Reginald from cirrhosis of the liver in 1925. He was Gloria Vanderbilt's father. By 1929, Alice's 3 surviving children were son Neely, her 2 daughters, famous artist Gertrude Whitney, and Countess Gladys Sacheny. The problem with the Vanderbilt fortune is that after Cornelius II, the Commodore's grandson, no one accumulated the fortune like the first 3 generations. Instead, there were far too many heirs spending far too lavishly. The Commodore had attempted to follow the Astor path of leaving a very large sum to one son, a smaller portion to the remaining males, and a pittance to the females. His son Billie doubled the fortune to $200 million, then split the bulk of it between his 2 oldest sons, both of whom married Alice and Alva. Another son, Frederick, managed to invest his small inheritance wisely, but was widowed with no children, thus left his fortune to his niece by marriage, Daisy Van Alen. Alice's mere $7 million was lavish for 1899, but living for 35 more years definitely dwindled the remains. By 1929, Alice's long absence from Newport was actually an effort to cut costs. She was hiding the fact that she could no longer continuously entertain. She would often keep large sections of her New York West 57th Avenue mansion and the breakers closed, reducing both energy and staff needs. She would alternate between the 2 residences, never staying in both in the same year. After the death of his remaining brothers, Neely reconciled with his mother Alice by 1926, almost 27 years later, and regained the sizable fortune, though somewhat diminished from $70 million, now closer to $20 or $30 million. He was a man of simple taste, more interested in inventing things and yachting. His wife Grace, however, was quite a spendthrift. Alice then had to continually contend with Grace's overly presumptuous and enthusiastic bids to become the Mrs. Vanderbilt. Grace even had the letterhead stashed in waiting. Grace did throw tremendous parties and reveled more in the social life than Alice ever did, but yielded the title to the Dowager until her death in 1934. When Alice did pass away, she left the breakers to her youngest daughter, Gladys, whose descendants occupied parts of the residence until 2018. The New York West 57th Avenue mansion eventually became the location of Bergdorf Goodman. Vanderbilt properties included in Newport, the Breakers, Marble House, Beaulieu, at least 2 New York mansions on 5th Avenue and West 57th Avenue, North Carolina's Biltmore Estate, and New York's Grand Central. Among the family endowments, support was given to the YMCA, New York Metropolitan Opera House, Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, Vanderbilt University, and Whitney Payne Museum. The whole Vanderbilt family is a tale of fortune built, lost, inherited, and disinherited, to be revisited in its various incarnations as our story permits. Section 3. Contemporary and Personal Relevance. In the fictional world of the Gossip Girl TV series, Nate Archibald is a descendant of the Vanderbilts through his mother. Season 3 storylines follow some of the complications of living up to the family's expectations. The real-life Vanderbilts are a far more complicated tale. In 1973, 120 out of the then 787 known descendants of the Commodore gathered for a family reunion at Vanderbilt University. Not a single family member present was worth $1 million. Now, of course, there are a few who have done quite well. Alice's granddaughter, Gloria Vanderbilt, went on to amass a $200 million fortune due to her fashion empire, and her Silver Fox son, news anchor Anderson Cooper's estimated worth is between $100 to $200 million, though that did not come from an inheritance or trust. His mother warned there would be no money, but might have left a small amount in the end. Another successful descendant from Alice through her son Alfred, who died on the RMS Lusitania, is James Platten Vanderbilt, screenwriter, director, and producer, writer of Darkness Falls, Zodiac, 2012 The Amazing Spider-Man, the upcoming 2021 Scream 5, among many other titles. He is also an executive producer on the Netflix series Altered Carbon. The youngest of the most well-known Vanderbilt descendants is a polo player and son of the current 12th Duke of Marlborough, George Spencer-Churchill, a descendant of Alva and Consuela Vanderbilt and a distant relative to Winston Churchill and fourth cousin once removed from Lady Diana Spencer, the Princess of Wales. That family line too suffered a disinheritance scandal in 1993. Another Vanderbilt descendant, actor Timothy Olyphant, has made his own fortune starring in Deadwood, Justified, and the Santa Clarita Diet. He descends from William Billie Vanderbilt through his daughter Emily, sister of Cornelius II. Also via Emily's line, Timothy's great-uncle, John Hammond, was a record producer, civil rights activist, and music critic from the 1930s to 1980s, a well-educated jazz fan who did not racially discriminate when choosing musicians to air on the radio. Hammond's illustrious career included working with musicians Benny Goodman, Count Basie, Teddy Wilson, Billie Holiday, Aretha Franklin, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, and Stevie Ray Vaughan, to only name a few. He was also instrumental in the revival of the Delta blues artist Robert Johnson. One final note, Hammond got his musical start while working with Benny Carter, whose two songs, Nightfall and These Foolish Things, are often used as musical cues in this podcast. You can locate both full versions of these songs and a few others in the wonderful digitally remastered collection at pastperfect.com, along with other music from the era. Please enjoy more of Benny Carter's These Foolish Things. Next, when we return to As the Money Burns, the price of a fortune is often a broken heart. When the darkness falls, no amount of gold will brighten the path of one sinking in love's despair. Until then. As the Money Burns is an original podcast written, produced, and voiced by Nikki Woodard based on historical research. Archival music has been provided by Past Perfect Vintage Music. Check out their website at www.pastperfect.com. As the Money Burns transcripts can be located at our website, asthemoneyburns.com. We'd also love to hear from you at any of our social media accounts, As the Money Burns, via Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.